Hey there, we are going to today put some shading and use our shading technique and our shading rules to apply it on this hand strip drawing. We're going to make it look like there's these stripes using highlight and shade and gradation to let this hand look like it's coming out of the paper and having these stripes drape over the top of it. Hi guys, today we're going to look at just the technique that we want you to use when you're applying some shading or applying some values and darks and lights. The main idea for us is to use little overlapping circles. And when you move around, you're going to kind of do it in a spiral direction or a spiral motion. And you can see how much these circles are overlapping, where you don't just see individual circles, but they overlap so much that it becomes a very smooth feel to it. And I'm moving around in kind of a spiral direction and slowly letting it grow. And you can see that these little circles are smaller, definitely, than even an eraser at the other end of your pencil. Get dark to light. So here obviously we're pressing pretty hard to get a dark value. As we start to get lighter, we want to press softer with those values, but continue to overlap a lot. And continue also to kind of float around the paper in that spiral motion. And I need to start to get softer and softer. So to do that, it's a good idea to just hold the pencil softer in your fingertips at first. Then when you want to get really lighter, I will hold the pencil much farther back to be able to get a softer, lighter value. And I'm still letting these little circles overlap each other a lot. And I'll go back where I might see some parts that need a little more overlapping to smooth out that texture. To get super light, I call this tickle shading. It's almost like you're just tickling the paper with the tip of the pencil and holding the back end of the pencil so softly that it would slip right out of your hands, but you can still control it with lots of, again, overlapping little circles. One thing we want to pay attention to is where your source image gets light and dark. So you can see where it's light here and it gradually gets dark right up next to the finger, and right next to that there's a little light spot that is an indication of reflected light, where light bounces around, and it also helps it let this finger stand out so the shading on the finger doesn't just blend into that stripe right next to it. So that's one thing when you work on your drawing you want to be aware of. So when I start to draw up next to this finger, I'm going to use my little shading rules and go nice and dark right up next to it, always referring back to my original source, the hand that I'm drawing from. And this is going to fade away just like we have done in the past. Then right up next to it, we have to leave a little space for that reflected light. And that's how much detail that we want you to be able to achieve in your drawing. So if you don't notice where some of those little lights and darks happen, you're not going to create that same sense of form. So when I'm looking back and forth, I also want to look at where there's a highlight right in the middle of this finger, because that's where the light hits the most. And then kind of a similar thing happens on the other side of this finger, where I can start shading on the other side of this highlight using my shading rules, my little circles that overlap, using my tickle shading so the highlight has a nice soft edge to it. There's a highlight developing right there. And I'm going to go out toward the reflected light on the other side of this finger. It's a little bit lighter right there. Then I can press really hard right next to it to allow that reflected light to have some contrast. So you can start to see where this finger looks like it's lifted off the paper. So the idea here, guys, is to continue looking back and forth at your source image, looking at how dark it is relative to each other in different places, and remembering to capture all the reflected lights wherever the gradations happen. And you're going to continue to do the entire thing, keeping that idea of little circles that overlap a lot, and you work in a spiral direction, and hopefully it'll look very similar to what you are, your resource image. Okay, down in this corner of the sheet that you're going to receive, there are some don'ts, what you don't want things to look like, and a lot of beginning students naturally do these things. One is you do not want to use single directions and only work from top to bottom, and a lot of students will then just shift right over and do the same thing, work in one direction top to bottom, work in one direction, and then you wind up with these stripes. And smooth shading should not have any of those stripes. Another thing that people do they will use, again, one direction, but then change direction sometimes and use little patches, or they might bump into each other a little bit, but there's still that overlapping of pencil strokes does not allow it to create a smooth texture. Another thing students will do is they will use really long strokes and want to hurry and get it done. And then a lot of students will tell me that, oh, but I'm going to then come back and fix it with the correct technique. So why do that if you're just going to do it right afterwards? So go right to that good technique and your results will be a lot better. One more thing that a lot of students do is they will start off making little circles that overlap, but it will very quickly start to turn into ovals that wind up looking like lines. So it's true, when we say little circles, we really mean stick with the circle that overlaps a lot as you move around in that spiral direction.